Hey there, welcome to another episode of Deeper Than the Backlog. I'm Ryan, and today we'll be talking about our Introduction to Kanban series. We're diving into part 4, which is focused on making process policies for your Kanban board. So, if you remember back, we've had 3 different parts to our 6-part series so far. You can find the videos out on YouTube, out on our website at deeperthanthebacklog.com. Everything's centralized there. Or if you prefer to hear the audio, you can listen in on any of your favorite podcast platforms. So let's revisit some of the first 3 parts just to get us on the same page, and then we'll dive into part 4. So about a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago, we talked about part 1, which was visualizing the flow of work. And if you're looking at the video, you'll see our infamous Kanban board that we've been using for each of the parts of our Introduction to Kanban series. And in this episode, the part 1 episode, we talked about how to set up a Kanban board. So how do you set up your stages of your workflow? How do you define a work item or task? And then we talked about swim lanes, which are our rows. So the stages are our columns and the rows are our swim lanes. And in this simple board, we have a to-do column or stage. We have an in progress column or stage, waiting, and then done. The most simplest form of a Kanban would be a to-do, in progress, or work in progress, and then done. So a 3-column Kanban board. We made it a little bit more complex. We enhanced it a little bit by adding a waiting column, which can come in handy sometimes. So that was what we addressed in part 1, which was around visualizing the flow of work and visualizing everything that is essentially on our task lists and what stages of completion that work is in. In part 2, we talked about WIP limits, WIP, work in progress. And on our example Kanban board, in our in progress stage, we mark that as a 2. So we put that we can have no more than 2 tasks or work items at any point in time in that column. And that helps modulate flow going through your various stages of your Kanban board. And it also forces you or your team to finish work, complete work, before moving on to another task. Because as we know, if you've listened to the episode on multitasking versus kind of working serially or prioritize based working, there is a penalty for multitasking, an efficiency penalty, where it actually takes you longer to complete work when you multitask versus working serially, work on a task, complete the task, and then move on to the next task. So by setting these WIP limits, you're able to modulate that flow and have really laser focus on the tasks you're working on, complete those tasks, and then pull from the next set of work in your to-do column. So that was what we talked about in part 2. Part 3, we talked about managing flow, and that was more geared around making your Kanban more efficient, looking for bottlenecks, and then measuring what we call cycle time, which was the time between starting a task or a work item and when it's complete. And then looking at ways of how to improve that, improve the overall efficiency and cycle time, as well as using that cycle time as a guideline for completion times. So you can start doing estimates and predictions off of the workflow items once you start measuring cycle time. So we talked about that in part 3, and now we're moving on to part 4. And part 4 is about making process policies. You can think of them as rules or guidelines, but it's really an agreement based on whoever's using the Kanban board. So in this situation, it'd be an agreement between Christine and I on our definition or guidelines. If you're doing a Kanban board for multiple teams, you would have policy guidelines for the teams. And it's important to note that there's various areas you can have guidelines on on your Kanban board. So you can start at the highest level and you can have a guideline for the Kanban board. Maybe define the type of work that gets put onto that board. Maybe it's only a specific project, for example, if you're working on a project team that would get put onto that board. Then you can define guidelines and rules for each of your stages. You can also do it for your swim lanes. And then you can also have additional guidelines around the work items themselves. So you can have checklists, for example, on work items that would need to be complete. You can define who needs to maybe sign off or review a work item. And so there's multiple levels you can have these guidelines. You don't have to have them on all the levels, but it's pretty typical to have them on your stages, so your columns moving across. And less typical on your swim lanes, but occasionally, an example there might be, say you have two teams. Each team has its own swim lane, team one, team two. Let's call them that for simplicity. Maybe team one, you only want to route issues or customer complaints to that team, because that team, their charter is to address issues and resolve them and come up with solutions. Whereas maybe team two is a development team, it's a new feature development team. So your process guideline on that swim lane for team two would be work only related to development and only related to new features would flow into that swim lane. So that would be an example of where you'd do a swim lane policy. Not super typical. It just depends how you set up the Kanban board. If it's a personal Kanban board, you're the only one that has the swim lane, or it's a single team Kanban, you probably won't have a policy on your row or your swim lane. But you may. The team may decide they want to, just so everybody's on the same page and in sync. So if you are watching the video, you can see that we have added a row at the top with lettering in gray. And what I've done here is just put a few examples of some stage or column policies. The first one you can see in the to-do column, our very first column, we put a policy that says must be in priority order. So what that means is that at all points in time, any tasks in that column must be in priority order. You could also define who sets the priority. That might be helpful. In this case, I set the priority for my tasks. Christine sets the priority for her tasks. We could explicitly say that, or in this Kanban, it's fairly obvious since we have our own swim lanes. I don't have any process policies in the in progress row or column or stage. You may want to on your Kanban. It just depends, what you're doing it for. If you're doing it for family, a team, a business. In our waiting, a pretty typical guideline or policy would be how long can something sit in that column or that stage before you want to take a different action. The work item's getting stale, maybe you want to move it back to do. It's just not going to progress anymore and you want to deprioritize it. So in this case, in our waiting column or stage, we put no task can sit in waiting more than 2 days. So each day we're looking at that. If something's sat in that column longer than a couple days, we'd want to move it back to do and deprioritize it. And then for our done column, we put completed work is reviewed by stakeholder. A very basic example of this is, say you were doing a family Kanban, you had maybe swim lane for adults, swim lane for kids, and you had a task for your son or daughter to clean their room. And so they've had that in progress and they go up to the Kanban and they move that to done. Well, you want them to get it reviewed by the stakeholder, because I don't know how many listeners have kids or have been through this, but if when your son or daughter says they're done cleaning their room, most of the time if you go look at their room, they've missed something. So you want to give them feedback, say, hey, you did a great job on the floors, beds made excellent, but you didn't put away your clothes that are sitting on top of your dresser. So that's feedback. It's not quite done. You're the stakeholder. You can define that in your task card if you want, just so it's crystal clear. The parent, the adult, needs to sign off before this can be moved to done. And that's what could be meant by completed work is reviewed by stakeholder. In a business situation, you might want to actually do a demonstration of a feature or a work item that was completed to a business stakeholder and have their approval that, yes, that's actually what they wanted or what their request was. So, extremely helpful, crystal clear, everybody's on the same page. And lastly, in here, what I'm showing in the in progress column, if we zoom in, we have a task on the in progress column along my swim lane for cutting lawn. So on actual task cards, feature cards, user stories, however you're defining your work item, you can also do checklists or finer grain details on items that need to be complete. So here I put a very basic in the cut lawn task. I've highlighted 4 different things we need to complete before that card can move on to the done column. And what we've put there is, the front yard needs to be cut, the backyard needs to be cut. We need to trim the weeds, and then we need to blow the grass clippings, off the driveway and sidewalk. So crystal clear, the criteria for work completion, there's no ambiguity there. Once those 4 items are completed, we know that that task's done. We can go check with whoever the stakeholder is. If you're cutting the lawn for your neighbor, you might want to say, "Hey, checked off all these items. How's the lawn look? Are you happy with what we've done?" They say, "Yep, we're good," and then you move that to the done column. So it's a method of communicating, keeping everybody in sync, everybody on the same page. Very helpful in team environments, if you're doing Kanban for family, if you're doing it for business groups or corporate level. I would say it's less helpful when you're doing it, essentially for a personal Kanban, maybe just to manage your daily or weekly tasks. You might have a few guidelines or rules or policies, but you're probably not going to go crazy putting a bunch of policies in place when you're really the only one controlling the overall Kanban board, and you look at it, you're in sync with yourself already. So it may not be a huge value there. But overall, you can have them defined for the Kanban board, you can have your policy defined for the overall Kanban board, the columns and stages, the swim lanes, and then finally the individual tasks themselves. In how do you define work completion? What does it mean to be done? And you'll hear that as a common thread throughout a lot of our agile discussions and episodes. The definition of done is something we talk quite a bit about. You would think it's pretty simple to understand, but there is a lot of details, finer grain details in, what does it mean to be done or completed with a feature requirement, especially if they are more complex tasks, features, requirements, user stories, etc. So there we have it. We talked about part 4, making process policies. And next, we'll start diving into part 5. And what we'll be talking about there is really about improved collaboration and some feedback loops, figuring out how to use feedback loops to make your Kanban more efficient, more effective for you, especially in team environments. Is extremely helpful. So look for part 5 coming up soon, and we'll talk about feedback loops. If you're interested in looking at any of the previous videos, we're out on YouTube, so please check out our YouTube site, Deeper Than the Backlog. We have the videos out there. You can also check out our website, deeperthanthebacklog.com. Learn more about Christine, myself, check out all of our episodes. We're up to, I think, 11 or so episodes released out there. And then we like to hear feedback. So feedback, suggestions, topic ideas, questions. We do Q&A sessions, and we answer listener questions on episodes, especially ones we get repeated often. So we call it kind of the frequently asked agile questions, the top frequently asked agile questions, and we address those. We'll also get back to you in email as well pretty quickly. So send those in. We've already done 2 Q&A episodes, and we try to do those every month or so. So about every 3 to 4 episodes, you'll hear those. And then we also, every few episodes, will continue releasing our parts on the Introduction to Kanban series. And we're almost going to be wrapping it up. We got part 5 and 6, and then we'll be done. And then we'll go into some practical examples of Kanban in various careers and self-planning type activities, as well as home-based task management. So look forward to that coming up. All right. Thank you. We'll see you next time.